I'm making this video after watching the distributist video, To Be Right Wing in 9 Points. And I think it's a pretty good video. I'd recommend you watch it. But I'm going to be more or less responding to the first 15 minutes. I'm not going to be responding to any of the 9 points in a lot of detail. And by the way, I'm also going to recommend that you watch a video by the YouTuber called Charlemagne called The Neo-Reactionary Trichotomy. I thought that was a very interesting video as a starting place to understand the right wing. And I want to correct a sort of misconception I think that this distributist had, because he took issue with the idea of right wing as just a negation of left wing, that the right is just the anti-left. But I buy it. I more or less agree with it. I don't think there is a right wing per se. I think that right wing just means that you are anti-left. And I think there's a bit of confusion going on here. Because when the distributist interprets that statement, he takes it to mean that the right wing is the ideology that believes everything opposite that the left wing believes. But that's not my view. My view is that right wing is a set of beliefs. It is a set of all beliefs, each one having at least one thing that disagrees with one of the central edifying tenets of left-wing thought. So, to be more clear, I view the left wing as a specific dogma with all of these rigidly enforced guidelines and ideas and a kind of inherently coherent, not coherent, but rigidly enforced belief set with views on a whole bunch of things. And right wing, it means just anything, any belief set that contradicts that in some way. So this dogma that I'm referring to, the left-wing dogma, you all know what it is. It's basically just the dogma of university professors, right? And it should not be that confusing. We should not be surprised to know that a lot of people in positions of power, a lot of, say, university professors, that their beliefs would happen to concentrate on the same thing. They would all happen to believe the same thing. Because I just attribute that to the mimetic nature of humans. We copy our ideas based on other people's ideas, and people in positions of power, they're all networked up, they know each other, there are networks of human connections, so eventually, over iterations of debates, then they all start to centralize on all the same beliefs. Because the people in positions of power, they are like the most well-networked. They're the most privy to this process of centralizing beliefs all around a certain mimetic kind of dogma. And I think this creates certain effects. Because the institutional voices, they promote leftist views, then those views are assumed to be a kind of default in the cities at least. And so if you live in a city, you're probably going to identify your political beliefs based on the views that you have which contradict the established dogma. So let's say I agree with like 80% of the dogma and then I disagree with 20%. Well, I'm going to identify a lot more strongly with the 20% because that's the part of me that's contrarian, right? And this, by the way, is why centrists are right-wing, because a centrist, if you agree with the right about 50% of things, then, well, you're right-wing because you disagree with the left about something. So I think that's a much better definition of the right wing than the entropy definition. I'm not saying the entropy definition is wrong, but it's kind of unclear about what it's actually saying. It's not something that you can digest easily in a nugget size. It's something you really have to dig into the philosophy of that statement to understand what it really means. Because you could say that in a lot of ways society, politics are becoming more entropic, they're degenerating, becoming less ordered. But in other ways, you could say that society and the world is becoming a lot more ordered. For example, regulations. The number of regulations is always growing. It's a complaint of right-wingers, and rightly so. And regulations are a type of order, I suppose. They're a type of rule. They constrain behavior. So is that entropy? Perhaps if you could do mental gymnastics, you could think it's somehow actually less ordered because there are so many regulations that it's complicated what actually to do, whereas it's a lot more ordered to have less rules because then it's simpler. But that's something that takes a logical leap to try to figure out. Most people would not say that. Most people would say regulations are an example of order because they're a rule. They're a certain constraining formal behavior. So even if you don't buy regulations, it is true that also society is becoming more complicated in other ways as well. For example, trade networks are probably becoming more complicated, and corporations, just corporate structures, corporations are becoming really complicated. I could make that into a more general statement about just the economy. The economy is becoming more intricate, more, I guess, layered. There are a lot more middle management roles where it's kind of unclear the person's actual contribution. The anti-left description, however, is a lot more clear to actually clarify what I mean. For example, if I said, I'm right-wing, well, there are a lot of groups that you could label as right-wing. There are libertarians, populists, corporate technocrats, war hawks, a lot of groups. Some of them seem to have more in common with the left than they do each other. And so if I say I'm right-wing, I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with any of these people on anything. I could be saying that, but not necessarily. Generally speaking, most people on the right wing can be classified into one of about 4 categories. You have the libertarians, of course, then the ethno-nationalists / populists, then you have the religious people, the religious right, and then finally you have the military people / the war hawks. So you have people who put emphasis on their god, their ethnicity, their country, and then themselves, their individuality, and their individual capabilities. And so, what is the left? Well, you can say a lot of things about the character of the left. And at risk of sounding like Dave Rubin, obviously they put a lot less emphasis on ideological diversity. I don't even think they deny this. The right really embraces ideological diversity, because that's what they need to do in order to form a coalition that can defeat the left. The left is a tightly controlled ball of, this is what you're allowed to think. And it's true that there are different types of leftists who get into debates and vehemently attack each other. However, I find that these differences, they have more to do with, where to put the emphasis, and different types of strategies, and the different types of topics they discuss. And rarely do you see them overtly disagree about fundamental philosophy, about what they actually practically want to do at the end of the day. What this means is your classic SJW will still support a lot of social programs like single-payer healthcare, whereas an avid Marxist, who the only thing they talk about is Marxism, they also probably support affirmative action as well. And if you dissent, then it's going to be an issue. There's going to be an excommunication, a canceling going on. I think with all of this knowledge, we can form a sort of unified theory of left versus right. Everyone, they support a lot of things that are status quo, and they also support a lot of things that are anti-status quo, a lot of things they want to change. This is true about everyone to different degrees, but almost everyone, regardless of political ideology, almost everyone has a lot of things they want to stay the same and a lot of things they want to change. But the issue is that the left has power. More precisely, the left is power. So when the left wants to uphold the status quo, there's pretty much nothing you can do about it. They are going to succeed at upholding the status quo. So those fights are pretty much deemed worthless. People don't even decide they're worth having. For example, who thinks it's a good idea to advocate to bring back the gold standard? Well, it's never going to happen, because the left doesn't support it. I don't really support it either, but that's besides the point. No, it is the powerful that push for change, because they are able to do that. The status quo has a lot of friction that makes it difficult to actually change. And these in turn become political issues. Just insofar as the will of the elites is different than the will of much of the rest of the population, those will become the battlegrounds. And inevitably, the elites will win, because they have power. But in the meantime, the debates will continue, and this is why the left can brand itself as the progressives, the people who want change. In practical reality, they're the only ones who are able to achieve change. Whether this change is good or bad is obviously a different question. But I think it's worth it to briefly go over some of the rest of the distributists' video. And here's, without going into any of these specific points that he made, here's my general issue with the video. I think the problem with trying to define right-wing is that by making a list, like a checklist, of views that every right-winger has, is that what you will actually end up doing is basically just enumerating the points which the left is most obviously wrong about. Because in order to be broad enough to incorporate every right-winger, well, probably every right-winger is going to agree about the things that the left is obviously wrong about. They're going to recognize, oh, that's stupid. But then you will be ordering a lot of your points like, oh, that other thing, that other belief is obviously wrong. The idea that human organization is capable of completely equal organization, no, that's obviously wrong. Obviously, hierarchy is a thing. And so on, because ultimately it just comes down to the right is the anti-left. And take, for example, someone who considers themselves right-wing, and the distinguishing factor is that they're really politically incorrect. But really, what their personality is they're just super edgy, and they don't care about progeny or the general project of humanity. They pretty much just care about their own short-term self-enrichment. But they still call themselves right-wing because they're just so edgy that their edginess leads them to be politically incorrect and have a bunch of politically incorrect views. Now, is the person not right-wing? Perhaps you could prescriptively say, oh, according to my definition, they aren't right-wing. But I think this is kind of an unfair way to do it. I tend to think that the way to classify a group is that you just look at the actual members of that group and look at how they self-describe. If they self-describe as feminist, then they're a feminist. It doesn't matter about my wish about how to define feminism. You just look at how people self-describe, and then you try to draw a circle around all the people who self-describe the same way, and then you try to come up with a descriptor that applies to all the members of that group, or at least almost all of them. And so to say, oh, you're wrong that you think that you're right-wing, I don't think that's fair. I prefer the descriptive approach, that if someone says they're right-wing, and there are enough people like that, then basically you need to change the definition of right-wing in order to include them. And that's all. Make sure to watch the videos I mentioned at the beginning, because they're definitely worth a watch, quite interesting.